In the suffocating summer of 1978, in the small Ohio town of Bellfield, fear didn't arrive with thunder. It arrived with chalk. First, a single mark scratched into a school desk, then another carved into a bathroom stall. Soon, they multiplied, spreading like a secret no one wanted to admit. 70 tallies in all, each line whispered about but never explained. At the center of it stood a girl, Angela Murray. Pale, quiet, her classmates called her Angel, though no one could say why. And when she was found in her family's basement, eyes half shut, her body beneath a wall covered in those 70 perfect strikes, the town stopped pretending. Was it obsession? A ritual? A punishment counted out one day at a time? The detectives called it case. The press called it a mystery. Bellfield called it curse. And decades later, the chalk marks haven't faded. The basement smelled of copper and bleach. On the damp concrete floor, police found a school notebook, its cover torn, its pages swollen with water stains. Scribbled across one page, in frantic looping handwriting, were the words, 70 strikes, one for every day she was meant to be saved. Nobody in the room understood what that meant. Not yet. The girl it belonged to, 15-year-old Angela Murray, nicknamed Angel by classmates for her calm, glassy-eyed kindness, was lying nearby, her body folded into itself like a discarded marionette. Her face looked serene, disturbingly serene, as if whatever horror had unfolded hadn't reached her soul. And then there was a tally. 70 perfect hash marks were etched into the wall above her. Neat, methodical, deliberate. Someone had counted down to this moment. The press would turn her into a symbol. The teen angel, they called her. A tragic figure destined for sainthood in the morbid folklore of America's darkest corners. But those 70 marks? They weren't decoration. They weren't a teenager's macabre doodles. They were a calendar of punishment. The notebook revealed more. Strange sketches of wings, a list of names crossed out one by one, and a final page that read only, "It ends when the tally is full." No fingerprints, no forced entry, no neighbor hearing a sound, just a girl in a basement, a wall of marks, and a phrase that made investigators recoil, 70 strikes. What the world didn't know, and what would take years of fractured testimony, burned records, and contested memories to uncover, was that this wasn't random. This was ritual. And the question that still curdles the blood is not simply who did this, but why Angela seemed to accept it. The year was 1978, the summer that wouldn't end. Bellfield, Ohio, an ordinary American town that prided itself on neat lawns, Friday night football, and the illusion that nothing bad ever happened there. Main Street looked like a Norman Rockwell painting smudge at the edges, the kind of place where shopkeepers knew your father's name and cops still walked the beat. But under that candy-coated facade was a suffocating pressure cooker of boredom, repression, and gossip. Every family had secrets, but Bellfield had an obsession with order. Churches rang bells on Sundays that sounded more like commands and invitations. Teachers leaned heavy on discipline, calling it preparing kids for the real world. And kids, well, kids learned quickly that silence was safer than honesty. By the late 70s, America itself was drifting in contradiction. The country was staggering out of Vietnam. Watergate still left a bitter aftertaste, and everyone was terrified of their children slipping into drugs, cults, or the satanic panic whispered about in TV specials. Parents clung tighter, churches preached louder, and school halls turned into battlegrounds of conformity. Bellfield wasn't immune. If anything, it was exaggerated. Every girl was expected to smile modestly, every boy to look sharp at practice. And those who didn't fit, who read strange books, dressed differently, or asked the wrong questions, were shamed into silence. Angela Murray lived right at the heart of that tension. There was something about her that unsettled adults. She wasn't rebellious in the obvious sense. No cigarettes hidden under her mattress. No sharp eyeliner or punk records blasting from her room. She was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you lean in only to realize she'd been studying you with intensity you couldn't explain. People said Angela could see through you, like she knew the lies you told yourself just to get through the week. That earned her admiration from classmates. Angel, they called her, a girl who floated above the cruel little pecking orders of adolescence. But it also earned suspicion. In Bellfield, difference was dangerous. The town didn't know how to process her gentleness, her odd sketches of birds and stars, or the way she spoke about fate as though she'd bargained with it. They didn't know what to do with a child who seemed too wise, too resigned, too otherworldly. So when the basement scene was discovered, when police counted those 70 marks, Bellfield recoiled in horror, but not shock. Somewhere deep down, they'd all been waiting for something to happen to her. Angela Murray wasn't supposed to stand out, and yet she did. Not because she wanted to, no. Angela had none of that hungry teenage spark that demanded attention. Instead, she carried herself like someone who had already seen too much. Her classmates remembered her eyes first. Pale gray, unsettlingly calm, as if they belonged to someone decades older. She could sit through the chaos of the cafeteria. Food fights, cruel jokes, the screech of plastic chairs, and never flinch, never even blink out of rhythm. Her teachers loved her grades, but hated her questions. Angela didn't challenge authority the way some kids did, with rolled eyes and sarcasm. She challenged it with unnerving curiosity. If a teacher said, "Because that's the rule," Angela would tilt her head, not in rebellion, but in confusion, like the logic simply didn't compute. Adults describe her as respectful, but difficult to place. At home, things weren't much clearer. Her father, a machinist who worked long nights, said she was the good one, the daughter he never had to worry about. Her mother, quiet and devout, said Angela was special. Though when pressed, she couldn't explain what she meant. Neighbors whispered that the Murray family was odd. Not bad people, not dangerous, just odd. Too private, too reserved. But it was Angela's drawings that unsettled everyone the most. She filled notebook after notebook with images of wings, feathers, and falling figures. Some were beautiful, angels poised above clouds, or birds in flight. Others were grotesque, winged creatures twisted at impossible angles, pinned to walls by spears, or covered in tally marks like prison walls. No one knew what to make of them. Art teachers said she was expressive, while kids in her class whispered she was weird. And then there were her sayings. She had these little lines she'd repeat, the kind that made her sound like she wasn't speaking to you at all, but to some invisible audience. Things like, "Every day has a strike against it," or "You can't change a number, you can only change how you walk toward it." Strangely, people remembered those phrases more than they remembered her laugh, or her voice, or what she wore. They remembered the feeling, like Angela was halfway between Earth and something else. The irony, of course, is that when she died, the press painted her as a saint. But her classmates, they whispered that she knew this was coming. They said Angela had been counting long before anyone else saw the wall in that basement. And that might be the most chilling part. She never once asked for help. It began with the sound of chalk. At least, that's how one classmate remembered it. Angela, sitting in the back of homeroom in early September, had her notebook open, dragging her pencil down the page again and again, straight vertical lines in endless repetition. The teacher thought it was doodling. Her desk partner leaned over, counted under her breath, 22. Angela snapped the book shut. After that, the signs multiplied. Her best friend, Carrie, swore Angela had started skipping lunch to sit in the library alone, scribbling strange equations that weren't math and weren't poetry. Sometimes she wrote single words, strike, measure, mark, fall. Other times, she drew those wings again, always half-shredded, always tethered to chains. One day, Carrie asked her, "Were you counting?" Angela didn't smile. She rarely did. But this time she answered, "The days left. You'll see when it's 70. That was the first time anyone heard the number. At home, the disturbances were quieter but more unnerving. Her mother noticed that Angela had stopped closing her curtains, sitting awake until dawn as though waiting for something to arrive outside her window. Her father found the basement light on at odd hours, his daughter standing in the corner, staring at the wall. He asked what she was doing. She replied, starting the tally. He laughed, thinking it was just her imagination. Then came the incident at the fall carnival. A fortune teller, one of those cheap booths with crystal balls and playing cards, told Angela she would live a long life. Witnesses said Angela's face twisted, not in relief but in rage. She whispered something back to the fortune teller that made the woman pale instantly. The booth shut down before the night was over. No one ever found out what Angela said. And then, on October 1st, a girl vanished from Bellfield High. Not Angela, someone else. A cheerleader, bright, loud, and seemingly untouchable. She was found 2 days later at the edge of town, shaken but unharmed, unable to explain where she'd been. The only detail she gave, someone had drawn tally marks on the walls where she'd woken up, 17 of them. The police dismissed it as a prank. The town hushed it up, but Angela knew. She told Carrie. That wasn't meant for her. That was rehearsal. And when Carrie asked, "For what?" Angela only said, "For me." It spread like a virus, quiet first, then unstoppable. Teachers started whispering about Angela in the break room, as if her strangeness was contagious. One swore she found a desk drawer full of crumpled pages, each one marked with neat clusters of 7 tallies. Another said Angela had stopped turning in essays altogether, just left blank sheets with a single line. Not yet. And the walls. God, the walls. Janitors reported that someone, no one ever saw who, was scratching tiny marks into the bathroom stalls, into the underside of desks, into the paint that peeled along the stairwells. Always in groups. Always in order. It wasn't graffiti. It wasn't rebellion. It was method. Someone keeping score. The students noticed too. At first, they joked. They called her the human stopwatch, claimed she was hexing the calendar. But then came the locker incident. Angela's locker was opened by another girl on accident. Same row, same number off by 1. Inside were dozens of little slips of paper, each with names scrawled on it. Some names were crossed out, some weren't. And right at the bottom, in handwriting that looked calmer than all the rest, was her own name circled. Rumors grew monstrous. Some swore Angela had joined a cult. Others said she was a cult, that she'd been recruiting kids quietly, convincing them the world would end after 70 days unless a ritual was completed. Others leaned darker. They said she was already dead inside, and the tally wasn't a countdown but a scorecard of what she'd endured. Carrie, the only one who still sat beside her, started noticing changes. Angela stopped blinking during conversations, her eyes glassing over like she was somewhere else. Once, during math class, she leaned in and murmured, "It's a 39 now." When Carrie asked what she meant, Angela just tapped the desk 3 times and went back to staring at the board. By Halloween, the whole school buzzed with dread. No one admitted it out loud, but they'd all started keeping track of the days since Angela first mentioned 70. And then came the football game, the one where Angela walked straight onto the empty field at night, stood under floodlights, and spread her arms as if waiting for something to strike her down. Security pulled her off, but the message was clear. She wasn't running from whatever was coming. She was waiting for it. And if you listened closely, you could hear her whispering the number like a prayer. 50, 51, 52. The tally was getting closer to the end. The official investigation didn't begin until after Angela was gone, which was already too late. But if you piece together the fragments, the school records, the interviews, the police files, you see the town groping for explanations like blind men in a burning house. Detective Charles Brigham led the inquiry, a man too old school for his own good. He didn't believe in omens, cults, or kids counting days until their own destruction. He believed in suspects, in fingerprints, in motive. And yet every corner he turned only made the case feel less human. Theories bloomed, each uglier than the last. One claimed that Angela had been groomed by a hidden sect operating on the fringes of Bellfield, a so-called counting church that believed the number 70 marked the cleansing of a soul. The tally marks on the wall, a preparation ritual. The notebooks, instruction manuals disguised as diary entries. Problem: no one ever found such a church. No records, no witnesses, just whispers. Another theory pinned the blame closer to home. Some said Angela's mother was the architect. Neighbors swore they'd seen the woman digging holes in her garden at night, murmuring prayers into the soil. Was she training her daughter for sacrifice? Or was it Angela who had twisted her mother's gentle faith into something macabre? Police found rosary beads buried beneath the basement floorboards, but rosaries aren't evidence of crime. Then there was a theory of contagion. Psychologists suggested Angela had been suffering from a rare delusional disorder, a kind of countdown psychosis. She infected her classmates with paranoia simply by believing so strongly in the 70. The missing cheerleader? Maybe just caught in the orbit of Angela's unraveling mind, playing out her fear. But if it was all delusion, why the tally marks in places Angela never went? Why the witnesses who claimed to hear her voice whispering numbers in rooms she'd never entered? And then came the wildest speculation that the 70 wasn't a countdown at all, but a tally of punishments, each mark a strike she endured, physically or otherwise, from some unseen tormentor. Was it a teacher? A classmate? A family member? No bruises, no signs of struggle, no confessions. Just the marks on the wall, steady, even as though she or someone was perfectly in control. Detective Brigham grew restless. Every theory collapses on contact with the facts, he muttered to a colleague. Either the girl was counting her own days, or someone else was counting them for her. And both answers are impossible. The strangest part? Angela herself. Witnesses said she didn't resist. She didn't run. She looked almost relieved when the count climbed higher, as if reaching 70 wasn't her doom, but her deliverance. And that is where the case slipped from investigation into mythology, because when the numbers refuse to explain themselves, people invent ghosts. Day 69. That's when everything snapped. Carrie swore she'd never forget it. Angela showed up to school barefoot. No explanation. No shoes in her locker. Just bare feet slapping the linoleum. She walked the halls like a ghost that had stopped pretending to be human. Teachers tried to send her home. She refused. Sat in every class in silence, scribbling her tallies across margins until the page was nothing but a cage of lines. That night, the Mays house lit up with police lights. A neighbor had called, said they'd heard a sound like with splintering, then silence. Officers rushed in, expecting a burglary. What they found instead was Angela in the basement, standing in front of the wall, chalk in hand, frozen mid-stroke. 69 marks. Perfectly straight, perfectly measured. When asked what she was doing, she turned to the officer and said calmly, "Tomorrow is the last strike." She was taken for psychiatric evaluation, but even doctors couldn't agree on what they were seeing. Some called it ritual obsession. Others whispered about possession, though never in their official notes. She wouldn't fight, wouldn't scream, wouldn't bargain. Just sat there repeating, "Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow." And then came day 70. Angela never made it back to the hospital. At some point that evening, she slipped away unnoticed. Some say she walked out the front door of the facility. Others claim she was discharged on a clerical error. The truth? No one knows. What is known is that by midnight, she was back in her basement. The officers who found her said she was kneeling in front of the wall, her head bowed, as if in prayer. The 70th mark was already drawn, and beside it, in neat handwriting, were 3 words, "I forgive you." But who was she forgiving? Herself? Her family? The unseen tormentor behind those 70 marks? The case should have ended there, but the breakdown wasn't Angela's alone. It was the town's. Parents barricaded windows. Teachers demanded police escorts. Churches overflowed with terrified families muttering about end times. Some said they saw Angela's gray eyes in their dreams. Others swore they heard chalk scratching in their own homes at night. Bellfield was no longer a town. It was an open wound, and Angela had been the scalpel. The question now was, if she had reached her 70, why did it feel like the countdown hadn't ended at all? The official report tried to sound confident, as though the neatness of paperwork could smother the chaos of 70 strikes. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner, undetermined. Everything in that file was just a polished way of saying, we don't know what we're looking at, and yet the theories wouldn't die. Some leaned clinical. They argued Angela had spiraled into a ritualized form of self-destruction, an obsessive fixation turned fatal. The 70 marks were her way of giving structure to despair. Tragic, but human. Clean, digestible. But then there were the holes. Too many holes. For one, the handwriting. Forensic analysts swore the last phrase on the wall, "I forgive you," wasn't Angela's. It was close, eerily close, but the slant was different, the pressure heavier. Someone else had been in that basement. For another, the missing time. Surveillance footage from the psychiatric ward showed her sitting calmly in the common room at 8:37 p.m. The next record of her existence was the police arriving at her home at 12:04 a.m. No trace of her leaving, no vehicle, no witnesses. The cameras didn't blink, but she was gone. How? And the tally marks themselves, impossibly straight, perfectly measured. Investigators tested them. The spacing was identical, as if drawn with a ruler. Angela's notebook showed lines that wavered, trembled, the marks of a human hand. But the basement wall? Mechanical, precise. The contradictions piled higher than the evidence. Some whispered Angela had never drawn the tallies at all, that she was a victim of someone or something who counted her days against her will. The phrase, "it ends when the tally is full," wasn't a prophecy she wrote. It was a sentence passed down. Others took the opposite view. Angela wasn't the victim. She was the orchestrator. The vanished cheerleader. The whispers of contagion. The terror infecting an entire town. Maybe the 70 was never about her ending, but about her completing some unseen design. And if that were true, who, exactly, was she forgiving at the finish line? Detective Brigham filed his report with one final note scribbled in the margin. If this was murder, the weapon was time itself. A line that sounds poetic until you remember. Angela seemed to know that from the start. Bellfield never recovered. Not really. The case turned the town inside out, like someone had shaken a snow globe and left the flakes suspended forever in midair. Angela Murray's basement was sealed, boarded, and eventually demolished, but it didn't matter. Every resident carried that wall of 70 marks in their head. Parents became paranoid. They counted everything. School days, meals, curfews, afraid of hidden tallies creeping into their children's lives. Some kids swore they saw marks appear in their bedrooms overnight. Scratches in wallpaper that hadn't been there before. Whether prank, hysteria, or something darker, no one could agree. The press, of course, feasted. The teen angel, they branded her, glossing her tragedy with sanctimonious headlines. The photo they used most often, Angela staring off in homeroom, gray eyes unfocused, turned her into a kind of secular saint. Preachers clutched her story as proof of spiritual warfare. Skeptics called her the poster child for mass hysteria. Everyone used her one way or another, but the deeper legacy wasn't on TV or in print. It was in the kids who lived through it. Carrie, Angela's only friend, dropped out of school the next year and moved 3 states away. She never spoke publicly about Angela again, but classmates recalled her muttering at graduation. It didn't stop at 70. Some of those classmates spiraled. Suicides ticked up. Petty crimes exploded. Bellfield High, once a proud little hub of order and discipline, was branded cursed in urban legend circles. Teenagers dared each other to sneak into the ruins of Angela's house, to mark tally lines on the walls of abandoned buildings, to whisper, "I forgive you," at midnight. Even the law wasn't untouched. Detective Brigham retired early, citing health issues, though colleagues said he spent his last years obsessively redrawing tally marks in his notebooks, filling them until the paper tore. And outside Bellfield, the myth metastasized. Conspiracy boards claimed Angela was proof of government experiments, of psychic warfare, of cult networks hiding in small-town America. Others claimed she was a warning, a symbol of what happens when a community's obsession with order squeezes a child into something unrecognizable. Whether martyr, monster, or mirror, Angela Murray became immortal, not for who she was, but for the questions she left behind. And the darkest part of her legacy? People started counting. Everywhere. Think it like this. Some kids dream about birthdays. Some kids dream about college. Some kids dream about nothing at all. Angela dreamed in numbers. 70 wasn't her curse. It was her language. The only way she could tell the world what was coming. And what did the world do? It gawked. It whispered. It waited for her to implode like a sideshow attraction. Bellfield let her count down without ever asking if the tally was hers to bear. That's the sickest part. She gave them the map, and they watched anyway as she walked to the end of it. There's an old superstition that angels don't speak in sentences. They speak in measures. Lines, beats, strikes, marks. They don't say, "You have 70 days left." They carve it into your life, one slash at a time, until the wall is full and your time is gone. Maybe Angela wasn't cursed. Maybe she was chosen. Or maybe she just understood the arithmetic of suffering better than anyone else. But here's the thought that keeps gnawing at me. What if 70 wasn't the end? What if 70 was just her number? Her role in a math problem none of us can solve. Because people are still counting. Cities, towns, basements, you find marks. Neat little sets of lines scratched into surfaces like echoes. They keep appearing, long after Angela's wall was buried under rubble. And in some quiet rooms, you can still hear the scrape of chalk when nothing is there. Maybe she forgave us. Maybe she didn't. But if you wake up tomorrow and there's a fresh tally carved into the paint above your bed, you'll have to wonder, how many are left? And worse, who's doing counting? Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.